Camera's good. And today, what is today's date?
Today is the 12th.
Today's the 12th of what?
Of what? Correct. I think February. And tomorrow is Wednesday, is the 13th. So Friday the 13th falls on a Wednesday this month. So tomorrow is not Friday. It's when. Never mind.
Failed. So tell me about when are you going to start doing stand-up comedy? That's the big question.
I would, but my back, I have to sit, and a sit-down comedy. Although I did see some very funny sit-down, in Vegas. Anyway, that's a whole other story, and it's something that can't be spoken of. It was too naughty.
Lay-down comedy would be another option, but that might just be women pointing at people and laughing.
Lay-down comedy.
Yeah.
Yeah, my girlfriends have accused me of that, but anyway, that's a whole other story again.
Point and laugh. So I think your cup. I think you might be rubbing your cup on your leg. Maybe you can just put
Just stop.
Yeah, I hear that little. What's that sound? All right. Yeah, the whole thing.
We don't like that, do we?
Just picky camera people.
Yeah.
So it's looking good here. So tell me, why are we here today?
Well, we're here today. This is another in a series of Ain't I Wonderful tapings. And today's episode, I thought maybe I would get into a very kind of traumatic moment in my life when I left the film and television world and left Manhattan and moved cold turkey to Georgetown, Maine with my then wife. And that was a lot, just that, making that big change. And it's because I had burned out, had a big disappointment in the film world back in the late 60s, and that's a whole other tale I don't want to get into at this moment. But I just said, screw television, screw film, let's do something different. We actually were living in Mexico, the west coast of Mexico at the time. Said, what are we going to do now?
Now this is, when you say we.
My wife at the time.
Your first wife?
My second wife.
So maybe you could say your second wife and her name and yourself, and then go from
her
there.
Name?
I know.
Yeah. So you want me to start all over again?
Well, just start off from, so
okay.
You live in Mexico, so,
Yeah, at that, my wife and I, Diane, who was a Fifth Avenue babe, just a beautiful young lady. We were engaged, but we were living in Mexico on the West Coast, and we were not going to go back to New York. So where are we going to go? And she said, well, how about Maine? We have been camping up here and loved it. So I said, well, how about Maine? So we moved to Maine, and what to do for a living, because I had not accumulated great wealth. It's an understatement. So what happened was there was a transition period when we moved to New York temporarily, and I would go up to Maine once a week with my truck, my van, buy a bunch of lobsters, sort them out, and then drive right back to Manhattan and sell them to a wholesale dealer on in the Fulton Fish Market, which at that time was in South Street, since moved out of Manhattan. But I did that for several months and learned a bit more about the lobster business, and eventually found a wharf for lease near Bath, down in Georgetown. And we moved to Maine and rented a house in Bath, beautiful house filled with maritime antiques, etc. And I operated a wharf. I leased a wharf down in Georgetown, Bay Point. There were half a dozen lobstermen there who needed a dealer. And being creative, clever, I said, Maine, lobster, oh yeah. Well, I knew nothing about it, the business, and I learned a lot of things I didn't want to know. It was a beautiful locale, very interesting dealers, very interesting community. But within several months I was broke. These guys were, what I discovered about that community, or those guys, those lobstermen, was, if you were in the mud, they'd help you to your knees, but they wouldn't help you stand up. And they pretty much tucked me into the cash register. I was very, very generous with bait and gasoline and all the rest of it, and they just took advantage of that. So I don't have a very good feeling about, well, never mind. I mean, I had no business jumping into the lobster business. It's their lobster, their community. I was an outsider who came in from New York, and I made the serious mistake of having New York plates on my van, and I kept the plates on until one of the guys said, "Bob, that's not a good message." It never occurred to me. So I got Maine plates. But it was a bit too late then. Anyway, so I operated that wharf. And the lobster season is relatively limited. So I thought, well, there were a lot of shrimp at that time. No longer true. They've been fished out. But there was shrimp, but it was only available on the other side of Georgetown, the point, Georgetown. I was getting the lobster at the mouth of the Kennebec. On the other side of the island is the Sheepscot River, where there was plenty of northern shrimp. So I thought, well, I got to do that. So we ended up buying a small cottage over in Harmon's Harbor, beautiful locale. A little cottage right on the water, 125 feet of deep water, Harmon's Harbor, beautiful view of the lighthouse at Booth Bay. At nighttime, it was just unbelievable to hold scene. And I paid $16,000 for this piece of land with a small cottage on it. And it was very funny. When I bought it for $16,000, I heard from some friends I had in the area that Everett, who had sold me the house, Everett had screwed Bob Giuliana. He paid him $16,000 for that place. Well, within 2 years, the real estate world changed, and the word around town was that Bob Giuliana had screwed Everett and paid $16,000 for that house. It was very funny, but that's absolutely true. But anyway, so I built a wharf, and that is a story in itself, and there's some photographs. Deep water. I needed to be able to bring boats in there that could go to sea, not skiffs.
Let's pause.
Let's pause.
No big deal. So, starting off with the deep water.
So I needed to bring boats in that were out dragging for shrimp. I had to bring them into my land at Harmon's Harbor, and I needed a wharf. It was a very difficult physical situation, but I decided to build a wharf. Now, I'm a guy who couldn't, at that point, build a bookcase, but I needed a wharf that could handle trucks. And so I drew up something, and the land was very, you'd have to see it, but the land ran down to a kind of a natural wall, dropped abruptly maybe 8 feet, and down to rocks that were covered by water at high tide. And those rocks ran out for another 15 feet, and then it really dropped off. Well, this is a very difficult situation, and there was no road down to it. So I rented a small bulldozer, and I carved the road down to that edge. And then I borrowed a 1948 Dodge Wrecker, which had been sitting idly in the field, and I went and spoke to the owner. He said, "Borrow it, go for it," which was very sweet. So I took it, it ran, and I had a friend weld an A-frame, a long pipe, a couple of long pipes into an A-frame, which we attached to the back of the Wrecker, ran the cable out, and I had my crane. And so anyway, I bought a whole bunch of oak logs. Unfortunately, I didn't know the difference between white and red oak, but red oak rots and white oak doesn't, not very much. But anyway, I bought several logs, so they were cheap, had them delivered, bought some 12 by 12 beams, etc., and proceeded to build a wharf that it ran out over deep water. And how do you run the piers, the posts, the vertical piers? I drilled a hole in the bottom of them, and with a star drill, I hammered holes in the ledges, put in rebar pins. With the crane, I lowered these oak, very, very heavy oak. They were logs, essentially, down on top of them, strung them out, held them vertically with 2x4s until I could put my big beams down, cut them off at a level, put the beams down, again with this crane. And there were actually times when I had the two rear wheels on these new beams, these new timbers I'd put down, backing out over that and dragging and putting out the next tier of logs. It was crazy. It was hairy.
How did you, first of all, was it you running the crane? How did you learn how to do this? Who taught you how to do it, and how many people were helping you, and how did that work?
How did I know how to do this? I didn't. I just logicked it. It just made sense that, I had seen wharves, and I knew that they pinned them to rocks to keep them from drifting. And I asked somebody how you drill holes in rocks, and I went and bought a star drill with a hammer and sat and pounded holes, and bought some rebar and had it cut to lengths and drilled holes in the bottom of these timbers before I dragged them out there. I just figured it out, and I bought a chainsaw so I could cut them off at a certain level. It was stupid. It was insane. And I did it over one winter because I needed to harvest as soon as possible because I was running out of money. And as far as help, I did most of it solo, which is insane, further insanity. Occasionally I could get some help from a person, but it was I remember one time I hired this young guy, and I actually had to save his life. He walked out on a piece of ice-covered beam without properly, and he started to slip, and he would have fallen onto some hard rocks down below, and I grabbed him and held him long enough so we could regain his foothold. But anyway, I had very little help. I had it when I needed it, but it was just one person after another. Anyway, it was the last tier of logs, of piers at the very end, which was down in deep water, which never drained out. It was just below water, that's what allowed the boats to come in and belly up to the last course of pilings. How to anchor those in the gravel and silt without ever seeing the bottom. Well, what I did was I rented a pump, water pump, big one. I got some hose and pipe, and I strapped a pipe to the bottom of the pier attached to the hose. I lowered this piling down into the water, and set it on the gravel and mud that is there. Started the pump. Well, the pump flushed water down through the pipe, which blasted the mud and silt out of the way, so the piling dropped and dropped and dropped. And I did that with the 4 last pilings out at the end, down to refusal, so they wouldn't go any further. And then I braced them back, and that became the last tier of the wharf. And I put the beams in and tied it back and put down the planking, which was, I think the planks were 4 by 12. No, they were 6 by 12s that with a final bed. And finished it, and I had a dump truck at the time for seaweed that I was starting to work with. And I thought, well, it's time to test this road and this pier. And it was snowing, so I drove down there. The road held. It was on the edge. I had had a guy bring in supposedly gravel, but he actually brought sand, unfortunately. And it held. I went down to the wharf, drove out there, held. I backed off, turned around, went up the hill, and I had my wharf. And I started buying shrimp, and then the shrimp took a right instead of a left, and the harvest collapsed. We didn't get any. I got 2,000 pounds of shrimp, and that was it. They disappeared, and I had serious financial troubles. But I had a wharf, and I used it to buy seaweed. I had this idea of seaweed, and that's a whole other story. I need a break.
What? How much is that wharf? How much would that wharf have had cost you if you had hired somebody to build it? And is it still there today? And what is the value of it now?
I have no idea what it would have. It would have been, I don't know, tens of thousands. Even back then, I have no idea what it would have cost because I didn't price it. However, and it's still there today. I built it in the when the hell did I build it? I built it in the very early 70s, and this is 2018. It's still there. I sailed up there about
2019.
Oh, 2019. Hey, Happy New Year. 2019. I sailed up there about 5 years ago, and I sailed into Harmon's Harbor, and there's the wharf, still standing proud. Even though it's red oak, I've used enough creosote so that it's still standing strong. It's not used commercially any longer, and the house is, it's a summer home for a couple out of Boston, out of Massachusetts, and so it's lasted. And what the heck's the name of the guy? There was a very famous wharf builder, and I spoke to him while I was building it. Mace Carter, very well beloved man. He was old then. He's certainly gone now. But Mace Carter was the wharf builder up in that part of the world. And after it was built, I gave him a call and said, she's all built. And he happened to be coming up from the south, and he cruised in with his barge and his boys into Harmon's Harbor and took a look at it. And he said, geez, good job, man, good job. He didn't say, you're a jerk for using red oak. I found that out later. But still, anyway, he said, the only thing I would recommend is you got the braces going across the flow of the tide. He said, I would remove them and put them so that they face with the tide. So if anything's coming down, it doesn't get caught in there. And I did that. But otherwise, he said, good man. And that was a lot coming from Mace Carter, who was a extraordinarily nice guy. And anyway, does that answer your question?
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think the? How much did you spend making that dock and renting equipment? How much did you?
How much did it cost? How much did I spend? The major piece of equipment, which was a 1947 Dodge Ram tow truck, that was loaned to me absolutely free. That was a wonderful gesture on the part of the owner. I forget his name. He lived in Robin Hood. Very nice man. But, I had help from Woody Freeman, wonderful friend of mine from Wiscasset, now deceased, young man. He and his father-in-law had a machine. His father-in-law had a machine shop, and Woody had all kinds of knowledge, and he helped with the welding and all that stuff. I mean, I didn't pay him trivial amounts of money, and the star drills and rentals for periodic. I don't know. I spent a few $100s, and the oak was very cheap because it was red oak, and I probably spent maybe $500 for the legitimate timbers that were delivered. It cost very little because that's what I had. I just made it happen. And I kind of rebuilt a chain hoist, old piece of junk, and I made it work again. And that was the name of the game at that point. It cost very little, and it made nothing. But it sits there.
But it might have made money. I mean, it had the.
Oh, it had the potential. I bought one bluefin tuna over the edge of that wharf. And my friend, Mike Wadley, who was the director of Woodstock, who had been my business partner in Manhattan, he came to visit. He and his sweetheart came to visit from California, and in their $1 million travel thingy. But anyway, he always had his camera, and he happened to be there. They spent some time on the wharf in their camper. He happened to be there when one of the fishermen brought in this 400-pound bluefin tuna, and Mike shot stills. I'd love to get those stills from him because I never took pictures of stuff. I mean, it wasn't. I never thought my life was worth documenting. But it was a dramatic moment bringing that fish up over the edge of that wharf. Beautiful animal, beautiful. It's kind of criminal to be killing them, but anyway.
So, do you want to take a sip? You can pause camera for a moment. Do you want to?
Yeah, Everett was. He was a nice guy, but he about a few months later he comes down the house all angry. And I said, "What are you angry with? What's up?" He says, "You got my whatever. He left a lot of stuff in the kind of a crawl space and in the shed. And he said, "You got my." I said, "Well, sitting right here. Let's go get it." So we loaded it into his truck. He somehow got this thing in his head that I had taken all his stuff and sold it or was whatever. And he was like really angry. Then he went, "Oh," it's like, whatever. It's like, so he's quite elderly. They had a very nice son, very successful lobsterman who died young the son. I was astonished. Went up there to visit him and he said, "Oh, he died." What? Yeah, anyway, I was part of the community for a number of years.
Now, just talking to the camera, just
Oh, it's running.
just tell me about Everett and the bank again. Just for hoots.
Okay, for hoots. Yeah, I bought the house from Everett Stevens, who was a lobsterman who had lived with Bessie, his wife, and his kids in that little cottage for years. I don't know how he did it. The water supply from the well was like a pint an hour. So he sold it to me for $16,000. Bessie had moved up the hill because it was at the bottom of a slope. He had moved up to a house because they were elderly. But Canal Bank no longer exists, but Canal at the time decided to finance this thing and take my mortgage because I was pretty friendly with the manager and he knew I was sincere. So Everett and I met at the bank up in Bath, and Everett was Everett. He came in with his cap slightly askew, which is what was one of his trademarks. So we go in and sit at this long, shiny table with the bank manager and chat for a while. And then the manager says, "So, Mr. Stevens, how would you like the check made out?" And Everett says, "Well, I'd actually prefer cash." And he reaches in his back pocket and pulls out a grease-stained brown paper bag, looked like it had held donuts or something, and he puts it on the table. And the bank manager says, well, all right. And he disappears, and he comes back with a stack of $16,000 in $100 bills, which Everett tucks into that bag and says thank you and goes away. And that was how I bought the house. Oh my God!
But and why did he feel you swindled him?
I don't know that he.
Explain the money thing again in terms of the value of the house. When he sold it to you, and then 2 years later.
Well, go back over what I just did.
Well, just to say about so he sold it for $16,000, and the market changed, and he felt like.
Oh yeah, well, when I bought that house, I was a pretty new face on that side of the island, and there was talk about who we were. This man from New Manhattan, with that. I think there's a photograph back there of me with all the hair and a beautiful wife who had been a model. Anyway, I'm sure we were the talk of the town. I'm certain. And when I bought the house in land on the water, 125 feet of deep water on Harmon's Harbor, I heard from a friend who in the town there I'd been to high school with, who was in that town. But anyway, he said the word was out that Everett had screwed me. He had sold me. I had actually paid him $16,000 for this cottage and small piece of land. And within 2 years, my friend told me that the word was now out that I had screwed Everett because the land values had turned around dramatically, and all of a sudden I had screwed Everett rather than Everett had screwed me. Within 2 years it had changed, but somebody was guilty, and somebody was always guilty. Anyway, that was it. It was, I sold it very few years, like what, 3 years later for $40,000, which helped defray my debts and paid off the house, and then helped defray the debts I'd run up starting my businesses. And not so long ago, the house was valued at $400,000, and they'd done very little to the house. It was just what it was, and I should have gone into the land business and not into the lobster, seaweed, mussel business. But next time around, that's what I'll do.
So you had rented a dock at Harmon's Cove, and the ocean had taken the
No,
storm had taken it?
no. I bought a cottage and built a wharf at Harmon's Harbor. That's the mouth of the Sheepscot. I had leased a wharf on the other side, which was in Bay Point, which is at the mouth of the Kennebec. That's the wharf that I leased, and that's where I bought lobster. And we rented a cottage, one house away from that wharf, which had been originally I'm told it had been a clam shucking place, but it was a cottage. It was livable barely during the winter, and we stayed through a year there, and very difficult. That's probably why I got divorced. It was a very hard place to live, and we managed because the wharf was right there that I was operating. But in any case, at one point, as I said earlier, we bought a cottage on the other side, so we could buy shrimp over in the Harmon's Harbor, the other side of Georgetown Island. But one night we were still living on the Kennebec side in Bay Point. One night there was a hell of a storm, and the house, which was on the rocks over the water, started to swing and sway, and I thought, this is not safe. And so the next day I said to a few people around, I said, that house was moving. And they said, geez, don't worry about it. It's been there for 100 years. I ain't going anywhere. Well, a few weeks later, while we were renovating the cottage over on the other side, over on Harmon's Harbor, comes another storm. And the house starts rocking and rolling. And I said, we're out of here. And it was like 4 o'clock in the morning. We packed up stuff, including 7 Yorkies. We had a pair of Yorkies, and they had a litter. And so we put them in suitcases and so forth, went up this hill, snowy hill, into the van, and went over to pardon me, Reggie, it's for you. Sorry. So anyway, we drove over there, moved in, slept on the floor for a few days until we could get some furniture over there. Well, several months later, there was a massive storm, and that house went out to sea, and that wharf went out to sea. So we weren't wrong. That house was fragile. Someone else had moved into the house, and someone else had taken over that wharf, and apparently there was the house with all its furniture went to sea. Nobody was involved. There was a cat, I think, living in the house, and that went to sea, and the wharf was taken out to sea, and that was a big wharf and had been there forever. But both were gone. Right now, all you can see is these pilings sticking up. That was close. That was close.
You had a restaurant at the end of it?
The house in Bay Point, yes, a summer restaurant, outdoor restaurant, which was, it was successful. We had lobster rolls and that kind of thing, and it was very popular. The Maine Times, which was a very popular newspaper at the time, out of Brunswick, the owner of that paper loved it, did a full-page story on a wharf with photographs and everything else. And whenever he had guests in from around the world, he'd bring them down there during the summer and sit out there. Mouth of the Kennebec is just gorgeous, and you could, it's just a marvelous place. It still is, minus the wharf, but
this is opposite Fort Popham.
It is right across the river from Fort Popham.
Well, I mean, so you did the restaurant for one season before you took?
Did it for 2 seasons, and we ran the restaurant for 2 seasons, and it required that I lay down flooring on the wharf because it was all punky and funky. But I some friends came up from Manhattan, and they helped me lay down flooring and do stuff there. And we there were some lobster tanks in the building, and I piped it with a pump so that when the water was the tide was high, we had salt water, and I would refresh the water in the tanks. And when the tide was out, it was all river water, which in those days was foamy with runoff from upriver. It's now been cleaned up, so we obviously did not pump at that point. It was tricky. It was tricky.
I mean, as a restaurant, like just cooking and menus and staff. I mean, what did you know about that? How did you do?
Well, I've got some nice photographs. Cut away to the photographs. There was no staff. It was my wife and I that we cooked and served, and it was a small place. It wasn't, it had no restrooms. I mean, it was pretty basic. I mean, it was an outdoor main, come as you are. People loved it because it was really rugged and rough and beautiful. And the food was good. I mean, the lobster rolls, we were very careful. We shucked the lobster meat right there. And we make sure that the grill was clean. So when we grilled the rolls, they were very tasty and crispy. We did a good job. And we had steamed, steamers, and yeah, it was a very limited menu, but everything was very good. And we'd sell steamed lobsters with drawn butter, and everything was nice and fresh. And it was popular among those people who knew it, but it had limited capacity, and getting there was, all the way from Bath down to Georgetown, down to Bay Point.
Whose idea was it, and whose idea was it, and was this out of necessity of trying to figure out how to make a living?
Whose idea was putting the restaurant there?
Yeah, and then whose idea was it, and then was it easy for you guys to work together, and did it help? Did you make any money doing it? Did it help you survive?
Well, the question is, whose idea was it? It was a natural for some people from Boston and New York to put a summer restaurant out there. It was just so beautiful, it begged for it, and it was a fairly large deck. So we had lobsters, we had clams, we had all that stuff wholesale, so it made sense to do it. It was fun. It was a lot of work. It was fun. Did it make money? I never made any money for the years we're doing the lobster and seafood business. Never made any money. It kept us alive for a bit longer, but eventually we failed. It was too small to actually turn a profit. It's just one of those ma and pa things where you just put money from your one pocket into the other pocket until you go broke, and that's the way it was. But it was it was enjoyable. It was an adventure. It was different, and we had gotten out of Dodge, and it was very wholesome and exciting until it wasn't. And then it was too rough, and we ended up getting divorced, and it was an unhappy ending to that. But the ride was interesting, and I stayed, and she went back to Manhattan, and she got married, had kids, and it's done fine.
Any idea? I mean, do you regret getting divorced from her?
Whew. Do I regret getting divorced? Well, it was a very unhappy thing, but it was, it was inevitable. I was not a good husband. I mean, I was and am still all about adventure. And she was just a very sweet, rich kid from Fifth Avenue, New York. Had been brought up with limousines and all of that stuff. And for the first 3 years of our relationship, Mexico, white Porsche, all kinds of adventures. But then coming to Maine, it was tough, and I really was more about the adventure and was taking her along. I was not about having kids and all that, which is what she wanted, and fair enough. But I could never bring myself to that, and it was very selfish of me. So I take full responsibility for the divorce. And I was married twice and divorced twice, and I think for the same reason. I was all about adventure. And my 2 wives, good women, had the nesting instinct. And I really didn't and don't.
Are they still alive?
I haven't had any contact with my first wife for many years. Hopefully so. She got married to someone I introduced her to, actually. Are they still alive? I don't really know. And my second wife, I haven't been in touch with her for maybe 5 years. I found something of hers in my stuff, so I contacted her and shipped it off to her. So I don't know, but I wish them well. I have some regrets, but no criticism of them. I mean, I take full responsibility for what I was about. Should never have gotten married. Yep.
And what about what did you do after you guys get divorced? What was the next step for you at that point? And were you crestfallen? Were you pretty depressed after that happened?
Are you trying to see me weep? Getting divorced is very difficult. The first time I got divorced, my first wife and I, Katarzyna Kapitan Juliana, who was from Poland, been raised in England basically and Canada, and we met in college. She was a concert pianist. She was a classical pianist. Same situation, same kind of first few years of our marriage were exciting. Trip to Europe, blah, blah, blah. Introduced her to Peter Herman Adler, who was the conductor of the Baltimore Symphony. He hired her as his assistant, as I knew he would. I was public affairs producer at WJZ Baltimore at the time. And anyway, and then I went to Africa to make a film. I came back, we went to Europe, we came back, and things got kind of rough financially. I moved to New York. We moved to New York. I got a job with Merv Griffin. But anyway, it was very difficult. Got divorced. And was it hard? Yes, it was very difficult after that. But then it was the 60s. It was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I was a bachelor in Manhattan in the 60s, discovered rock and roll and marijuana, and had a great time for a while. So I recovered. And then met my second wife, Diane, and we moved to Mexico for a while. Anyway, yeah, and that getting divorced again was very difficult. But, you do what you do. They both landed on their feet, fortunately, and both got married. And as far as I know, we're successfully married. And I'm a bachelor.
What year did you get divorced from Diane? And
I'm terrible with dates. But anyway, that would have been 70 from Diane. That would have been
late 70s?
That would have been mid 70s.
Did you ever go through like periods of depression over it? I mean, were you ever like?
Sure. Of course, I went through sometimes sadness. I don't know what depression. I wasn't clinically depressed. I don't know what that means. But anyway, yeah, I had a rough time of it after Diane and I split. I was here with a bunch of dogs and a business that was failing, and experimenting with new products and seaweed and mussels, anything I could do. And yeah, it was very difficult. I started drinking heavily, which was a first for me. Didn't last very long, but lasted for a couple of years. And that was depressing in itself, and I stopped. It wasn't something I was committed to forever. But it was, like the Band-Aid. And, dating, and met some very nice ladies and so forth. And then sold a place in Georgetown, paid off my debts, and moved to Bath and became a restaurant manager. Opened up the Taste of Maine restaurant for the Crooker family. Opened up the Wife of Bath on the Kennebec in Bath for 4 owners, one of whom was the president of Bath Iron Works, Buzz Fitzgerald, and 3 other guys. And I did that for a few years, made a living, and became a happy bachelor for a few years. And then moved to Portland and went back into television briefly.
Did you feel like you found yourself again? I mean, did you feel like, did you find your power back in a sense?
Not yet. I haven't found my power yet. In the meantime, I became old, and that is a whole other adventure.
Now and then, did you feel like you were looking for that one big hit again? I mean, did you have that sense you're trying to figure out how to have that success again?
Did I? Oh, that's an interesting question. I just made a living. I mean, I've done a whole bunch of things since then. I didn't have the focus I had when I was in film and television. Although I did some commercials here in Portland. A series of commercials. I produced the main lottery show for a while for Channel 13, GAN, and I produced the Symphony Special, a fundraising special for the Portland Symphony with David Ogden Stier as the host. If you remember him from MASH, he was Colonel Winchester. He came for 3 days and we had a great time, and he invited me back to Hollywood. He said I didn't belong here, I belonged back in the business, and he invited me to Hollywood, but I declined. Anyway, I'm burned out. I'm tired.
One last question. So you've got different people who have invited you to go to these things, right? You had the Rolling Thunder tour.
Mm-hmm. Larry Johnson invited me to join the tour.
Pyramid Films, not Pyramid, but
Paradigm.
Paradigm Films. They went off. You guys had a split there.
Yeah.
David Ogden invited you to come to.
David Ogden Stier.
Stier had invited you to come to Hollywood. So you obviously kept on getting these invites to go and use your talents. What stopped you from doing it?
I guess I'm committed to failure, it sounds like.
But these people saw this in you. You clearly impressed them with your skills.
I'm wonderful. I decided at one point I didn't want to get into that world again. I did it for 20 years. I was successful, absolutely. I feel very proud of what I produced, what I did. Made a good living, came close to making fortunes a couple of times, but it was never about the money, and I just burned out on it. I just didn't want to be into that rat race again. Apparently I had enough talent, or whatever the hell I have, so that people wanted me to rejoin them in doing stuff again. I just didn't feel it. I just didn't and don't really feel it. I went off and decided I wanted to read and study, and I've been studying philosophy, I've been studying the Founding Fathers, and I've been doing more intellectual stuff. And I started a magazine which ran for about a year, less than a year, based on regional nostalgia, which was editorially hugely successful, financially a flop. If I ever wanted to make some real serious money, I'd get back into that, because I've figured it out. Huge market for it. People just sucked up the magazine. For a year after I closed it down, I was getting requests for the next edition, please. I mean, it touched the nerve, and it was done beautifully. It really was done very well. I had a great staff. It was heartbreaking to close it. And it sits there. It can be done. The problem was I didn't understand the distribution game. That part of it I got wrong, and that broke us financially. But the magazine, the concept was absolutely correct, and was confirmed over and over. And if I had the energy, I would probably do that again in a different way. The distribution would be different, and I'm sure it would score heavily. But right now I'm busy stroking my ego in front of a camera,
Well, but you're being pursued for that. I mean, it wasn't your idea to do this. It was my idea.
Say again?
It was my idea to interview you, generally.
Oh, the interview thing. Yeah, Reggie insisted I do this, and as I've said over and over again, Reggie is as persistent as a toothache, and when he wants you to do something, you do it.
Better. Well, do you relate to Hemingway? I mean, what does your venture persona come from? Who do you relate to that really, give you this roguish kind of guy that you are? Where does that come
Why am I in search of adventure? Is that what you're asking?
from? Yeah.
Well, I've thought about that, and at this point in my life, as I'm approaching the end of life, I'm thinking, well, what the hell was this all about? And why am I who I am? And I don't really know. I know that at 14, I think it was, I had an epiphany at 14, and it was, I'm going to live only once. I'm going to make the most of it. I'm going to live several lives, live all the lives I can. At 14, it was that. I remember I had taken lessons my folks and siblings were into the Congregational Church in Jamaica Plain, and I took lessons as if I was going to join the church. And I remember going through the lessons and all the rest of it, and on the specified evening, I went into this room with the board, and they said, "Bob, are you ready to join the church?" And I said, "No." Surprised myself. My mouth said no. I said, "Thank you." I was done with the church. And it just struck me that I really was not into it. And that moment I looked at my life, and I had been reading James Fenimore Cooper and Nordhoff and Hall and Dickens, and those authors somehow instilled in me a feeling that life can be whatever you want it to be, and my life would be an adventure. And within a very short time, I was in a canoe going up the Concord River and disappeared into the wilds of Haven Bay for 6 days and didn't see or hear anybody for 6 days, which was pretty weird for a kid of that age. And I liked it. It was just an adventure. And my folks finally sent someone up the river to get me because there'd been a hell of a storm the night before. And Fairhaven Bay was the place that Thoreau mentions, because Thoreau was another author that I really dug. And I wanted to go to Fairhaven Bay, which is not far from Walden Pond. But at that time, there was no one there. It was uninhabited. The only humanity I saw was an American Airlines plane that would fly over every day going to Logan Airport, I guess. Otherwise, it was totally. And I liked it. And that was adventure number one, and it's been that way ever since. Yep. So explain it. I can't explain it. That's what I feel.
Do you think that is your sort of perfect moments There's moments of like being at sea, being sort of the captain of your ship, or being on the canoe. I mean, what is your what are some of the moments that you treasure or want to sort of, if you could relive those perfect moments you have? What are those moments?
Well, I think reliving perfect moments. I don't want to relive anything I've lived. I want something different. I mean, that's a fact. There were some wonderful things that happened to me, sailing and crossing in the Atlantic and camping in a storm and canoeing over the whitewater and blah, 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 being in dangerous situations in Africa and Mexico and all of that, those adventures. They were wonderful, even if they were scary or they were difficult. They were wonderful, and I don't want to relive any of them except mentally, or on on video. But I want something new all the time, and what is that about? I don't know. That's just what I like, and I don't think I don't live wildly. I'm not crazy into drugs or anything like that. I don't want to hurt myself necessarily, although I do hang it out there in the wind sometimes. But that's a tough question.
And is there a wanderlust about you think? I mean, the Alaska, expeditions and all this stuff. Is that the part of that wanderlust you?
Well, you can wander into strange lands by going to strange lands or just doing different things where you are, and that's what I'm doing in Maine. I mean, I've been in Maine, but I've been through some adventures here, which are fairly exotic. I mean, building that wharf that I mentioned earlier, I mean, that was a strange land. And, inventing smoked mussels and ascophyllum and fucus visculosus meal to sell out in the Midwest. I mean, those are all adventures. They're not geographic adventures, but they're adventures. I always need a project. Right now I'm rebuilding the shelving in the kitchen. That's getting me excited. Not because the shelf is that exciting, but it's a project, and I'm enjoying learning stuff as I move ahead. Reggie, I'm exhausted.
All right, and by the way, do you think back about the building of the wharf and go, how the hell, what the hell, how the hell did I do that? Do you ever think about what the?
I look back at pretty much everything I've done and say, what the hell was that? Yeah, I don't understand a lot of things. I mean, what's to understand them? I mean, I stuck my butt out in the wind, and here comes the wind, and I went through it, and I'm glad these things happened. I'm glad I have something to look back on. At my age, my energy is considerably limited. It's happening, but I have not lost my lust for life at all. If I look back on those things, I say, yeah, God bless it. I'm delighted that I lived the adventures that I wanted to live and continue to do so. Who knows what's next?
Sold.